Hello everybody and welcome to IAB Europe's ADEX Benchmark 2016 webinar. I'm Alison Fenner, I'm Executive Business Advisor at IAB Europe and I'm going to moderate this session for you. So the webinar is going to last approximately 50 minutes and we're going to split that between a presentation, a panel and a Q&A. Don't forget that the ADEX Benchmark 2016 report is available to download on our website from the Value of Digital Advertising section. If you want to share the presentation with your colleagues, the webinar recording will be available within a couple of days in the events area of our website. So before we start, let's take a moment to ensure that everyone's ready and familiar with the webinar control panel so that you can get the most out of today's webinar. So first of all, you should see a control panel on the right-hand side of your screen. You can minimize the panel by clicking on the double arrow button in the upper left corner, and you can expand the panel by clicking the same button. You'll also note that there is a chat panel and a Q&A panel. You can submit any technical queries or issues in the chat panel to the IAB Europe team and we'll respond to those. You can submit questions for speakers using the Q&A panel located near the bottom of the control panel. So you just need to differentiate between those two, the chat and the Q&A panels. We'll answer questions live during the Q&A session at the end of the presentation if you've submitted any questions there. If you need help during the session, you can raise your hand by clicking the red exclamation mark icon just above the chat panel. So just to be clear again, technical issues submitted to the host in the chat panel and questions for speakers in the Q&A panel. So I'd like to move on by introducing our presenters and panelists joining us today. So really delighted that we've been able to put together a great selection of presenters and panelists for you. We have Daniel Knapp, who's Senior Director TMT at IHS Markit, and Jessie Chen, Senior Analyst TMT at IHS Markit. They're going to be taking us through the research, which is jointly produced by IAB Europe and IHS Markit. And then for the panel, Daniel is going to be joined by Juliette Valin, who is Senior Strategy Director Executive at RTL Group, Blake Cuthbert, Chief Digital Officer at OMD EMEA, and Tim Jones, who is International Research and Consumer Insights Lead at Oath, and also Chairman of IAB Europe's Research Committee. So thanks very much to all of the panelists and presenters who are joining us today. And I'm now going to hand over to Daniel and Jessie to take us through the presentation. Welcome, Daniel and Jessie.
Thanks very much, Alison, for the introduction. And good day, good morning, everyone. I'm going to present from San Francisco today, so it's a bit early for me, but I shall try to be as energetic as I can. The ADEX study, which we're going to discuss today, has been going on for over 10 years. And within those 10 years, we have seen tremendous changes to the world of digital. And I think the study this year really shows how far the industry has come. So I will talk to you about the study, about the macro trends and what we're going to see across the different markets. And then my colleague Jessie will go deeper into the key formats, in particular video and mobile, what's been happening there. And then we'll conclude with an outlook of what we are going to expect 2017 to close on, given feedback from the participants to the study. Now, if we look at ad revenue or ad market sizing studies, there are probably as many definitions of ad revenue or ad spend in Europe as there are countries. Each country that we work with in the IAB context uses different measures and standards as to what they include and in particular what rate they have the data in. In particular, also in different countries, there are different terms for different rates, which makes actually arriving at a common European consensus measure extremely difficult. So what we're going to do here is did here is a meta-analysis of existing studies from the IAB Europe members, the national IABs, and we harmonized those studies by adding our own proprietary data on platforms and other things that the IABs might not have measured. Everything that we do is what we call gross ad revenue or gross ad spend. This is the publisher perspective, and it's the spend billed by the publisher before agency commission is being deducted. In this study, we now have 27 countries. We started modestly, I think, with around 11 in 2006. So you can see we got, apart from the grey patches, nearly everything in Europe covered. This is not a political definition of Europe, that you can see, so it's not the EU 28 that we have in here, but a much broader definition of Europe. And this covers around 95% of the market of this broader definition of Europe, with the remaining markets in grey here not contributing yet, but we're in discussions to extend the study here as well. So about the data, as I mentioned, we get data for the study from the national IABs. We adjust and fine-tune that data. We get provided estimates for things that the IABs do not measure. We work together with IABs to define estimate standards, for instance, and also we use our own proprietary database and our macroeconomic data to fill additional gaps and to relate digital advertising to trends in the economy and also to other media, TV, radio, out of home, and so forth. So let me start by taking you through the big picture items here in the study. The key number to remember is 41.9 billion. That was the value of European online, as we call it here, advertising, desktop and mobile across all formats in 2016 in Europe. So nearly a 42 billion euro industry. And to put this number in perspective, that's about the size of the GDP of Serbia. Or if we looked at the World Bank's or the OECD's list of countries in terms of GDP, it would be equivalent to around the 84th largest country in the world out of 193 countries that these macro studies are tracking. Talking about macro, what is key, of course, is the economic performance. Advertising is very closely correlated to economic performance, in particular industrial production and household consumption, and GDP is another very important measure here. And we can see that in previous iterations of our study, we had to measure the growth of online advertising against a very tough macroeconomic environment. We had a double-dip recession in Europe, as you can see very clearly here in the 2009 and in the 2012-2013 dips. It took economies a while to get out of this. The good news is that for the first time, really, since 2012 in our study, we had the major Eurozone economies all in positive growth, and many of them accelerating growth. So we had a positive and stabilizing growth. So we had a positive macro environment backing up the trends we saw this year. The growth that we saw from the 41.9 billion amounted to 12.3% like-for-like. I say like-for-like here because we adjust the growth rate so that the numbers directly comparable with that of last year. So if, for instance, an IAB measured new things in mobile, for instance, that they didn't last year, we extrapolate that data to ensure that there's a like-for-like growth rate we can compare apples and apples. These 12.3%, of course, in perspective, look very strong. We can see that since the study started in 2006, the online ad market in Europe had a 35.3 billion euro net addition in all those 11 years. And as you can see, through all those years, we had growth. So despite this macroeconomic environment, which was weak in several years, we always in growth in those years in aggregate. And here we can see the picture. We extrapolated growth back to 6.6 billion. This is for all the 27 countries that are now included in the study. We worked this backwards. To give it a bit more history of what happened in those 11 years, we can see that this growth happened as online offsets losses of traditional media, and for the first time we see a new ad market high since the 2009 recession. So you can see peak traditional media, the highest revenue that traditional media generated from advertising was in 2007. Then we saw digital already bringing the market forward in 2008 with a historical market high, which had since been not topped due to a factor of cyclical changes, of course, the macro changes, and of course the structural changes, the migration of dollars from traditional to digital. We then had the recessionary market low in 2009 as the recession hit hard, and many years of a flat market where established markets were trying to recover from the recession, and we saw emerging markets making good for those losses. A key thing, though, is that we can see that the share of other media, traditional media, declined throughout, and that this stability was mainly driven forward by the growth of online. And then 2015, for the first time, online offset the decline in traditional media, and now we have, for the first time, a new market high of 1.6 billion euros higher than the peak we had in 2008. But as more things change, the more they remain the same. Despite the changes in the macroeconomic environment, and despite the fact that digital has been maturing over all those years, so getting a higher ad share per capita, the growth rates for 2012 haven't really changed much. We only saw a maximum of 1.6 percentage point variation in growth over the last 5 years, so an extremely stable and constant growth in Europe. This growth and the sizing of 41.9 billion has meant that online expanded leads over all other media categories. Last year in our study, we established for the first time that in aggregate, online is larger than TV. Although that comparison arguably is a bit unfair, as TV is very few things in terms of ad formats, whereas in online you have many things together. You have display, video, you have different formats, different devices, search, classified and directories. So it's not that online is competing with TV here, and that's not why we established this difference. Indeed, many broadcasters are actually succeeding very strongly online. But we show it just for just to understand the magnitude of investment that goes into digital channels. And we can see as other media slowly grow, as TV or others decline, like for instance print or even radio, cinema flat, we can see that online dramatically expands its lead as the largest ad media category in Europe. Let me delve briefly into the markets, what happened within the 27 countries that we surveyed here. For all those years that we tracked it, and in particular the last 4 years, we could see a growing concentration of ad spend on the top markets. So the biggest markets had more share of the total digital ad spend in Europe. For the first time in 2016, this is not the case, and we saw the mid and the long tail of smaller markets increasing its share as they grew extremely strongly, establishing themselves as new contenders. So we can see that the ad spend is becoming more diversified across Europe. Who are these big markets? We can see here the top 10, the UK, Germany stand out. Not much changes in the ranking as we can see here. Only Belgium and Switzerland, they pushed away some smaller markets to enter the top 10. But remarkably, we can see here that the UK maintains its lead, and only 2.4 times the size of the German market, despite a lower population and despite a slightly lower ad market overall. So it's clear the lead of the UK shows also the scope of growth available in other markets, because again, if we overlay macroeconomic indicators or ad market maturity indicators over Germany, over France, Italy, and others, we can see that relative to the UK, there is still a lot of room for organic growth in those markets for online to drive ahead. And the UK is, of course, as you can see, as big as the next 3 markets combined. We expect the UK to continue to grow, but as structural changes are being removed in those other markets, we're going to see their ratios going to increase and this gap to close over time. I mentioned just a few minutes ago that a lot of the growth is now coming from the smaller markets, that the relative reliance on the big markets is declining. Among an average European 12.3% growth, you can see on the left side of this average, a lot of the smaller markets, the CEE markets, are leading the growth this year. Ireland also stands out here as the Irish economy is now recovering rapidly after a prolonged period of recession, and we see that across all media in the advertising domain, but of course also in the financial markets domain and so forth. As an analyst, I always like bubble charts of this one because it conveys so much information at once. So here you really have a one-stop view of what's happening or what has happened in 2012 in all those different markets. You can see on the x-axis on ad spend per capita an indication of market maturity, so how evolved is the online ad market. On the y-axis you see the year-on-year growth, the agility of the market. The dotted lines are the European averages, and the size of the bubble is the size of the market. There's several things that really stand out here if we take an overlay perspective. If we overlay this, we can identify several different groups. Let's look at the left first. Clearly here in the pink background you see it's mainly emerging markets with a low ad market maturity that are growing very strongly. That's no surprise at all. Then you see a clustering of fairly mature big Western European markets underlined here in orange that are growing just slightly below the European average and who are more mature than the European average. This clustering is very peculiar because we've seen the same clustering over the last 3 or 4 years. The same markets in the same cluster relative to the rest of the market. So this shows there are some structural barriers that have to be overcome in those markets to continue to grow further. And then we have on the right side, green underlined, something quite peculiar as well. We see markets that are exceeding significantly the European average of online ad spend per capita, and which are growing, some are growing as strong as the less mature markets, Denmark and Norway, slightly below the European average. But then you have other markets that are extremely mature and grow very quickly. Ireland, Sweden, and the UK, even Switzerland here stand out. The UK obviously the most. So this is interesting because it shows that online advertising hasn't reached a ceiling of growth, that growth isn't finite, but that the proliferation of ad formats like video, of better mobile experiences, of an ad tech infrastructure, and other factors can propel even mature markets to a above average growth in digital advertising. So what are the factors behind this growth? These are factors that we asked the IABs for what they saw in their local markets as the key drivers and hurdles. Programmatic automation, the efficiencies and effectiveness gained here was clearly a driver. E and M commerce is on the rise, creating more opportunities to capture consumers and to drive them to those E and M commerce sites. Online video consumption was mentioned frequently. Also, it's combined now with more availability of premium video inventory, so we see a size of demand, an increase in the size of demand, and an increase in the size of the supply. Better ad quality, so fighting fraud and other things. We see that many publishers are improving the experience of their mobile websites. We see strong growth coming from social media platforms and large-scale platforms. Native advertising as a mode of engaging consumers more visually and in a non-interruptive manner. And certain sectors like esports booming with esports leagues, with gamers and streamers and YouTube driving growth and attracting brands to digital, and also consolidation in the market, making infrastructures less fragmented. Some hurdles as well, and sometimes those hurdles are the same as the drivers, interestingly. Ad blocking, fraud, there's still, despite consolidation, huge complexity in the value chain. Brand safety remains an issue. Privacy and regulation, in particular, the GDPR and e-privacy directive are issues. Measurement and how to attribute things across screens, for instance. There's lots of data, but how we to turn that into coherent insight that drives strategy and the development of mobile ad experiences. And also, we're seeing some issues in converting from a desktop to a mobile experience with higher production costs and other structural barriers that have to be overcome. Concentration issues or platform reliance, and also a macro environment in some markets and adverse political conditions, but the sanctions in Russia, for instance, or the political turmoil in Turkey. And with that, I'm going to briefly hand over to Jessie, who's going to guide you through the individual ad formats that we cover in our study.
Thank you very much, Daniel. I'm going to just quickly go through the performance of display, classifieds, and directories, as well as search in 2016, and say a few words about video and mobile. So in 2016, we saw an addition of 5 billion ad spend in online advertising, with a half of that came from display, but search was still the biggest format, total to 19 billion in 2016. And in terms of the individual formats, all formats continue to grow in 2016. Display grew 4.1%, classified and directory grew 7.4%, and search grew 12.9% in 2016. Display has been the fastest growing format for the past 3 years. And in terms of share, search has been the biggest format since 2009, but display has increased its share in 2016 and has taken some shares from search and classified and directory. Let's look at the performance of each format in 2016. Display in 15 markets grew above European average, including 4 out of the top 10 markets by size, but there was a large differences in growth rates, ranging from 45% to 4% decline. Mobile and video were the 2 growth engines behind display's high growth. As for classified and directories, it continued to lose share to display and search, but growth slightly accelerated to high single-digit levels in 2016. And this was driven by the consolidation of European classified and directories markets, which allowed for more concentrated innovation and increased scale. And for search, despite search is now the biggest online format, growth of search shows no sign of slowing down. All markets grew in 2016, and 19 markets saw double-digit growth. And this is because search continues to attract a growing pool of small advertisers, and also the proliferation of e-commerce also supported the strong search growth. Okay. And now let's take a closer look at mobile and video. Mobile share of each format increased by almost 10 percentage points year on year. Social media advertising played a significant role in this, and especially in mobile display growth in 2016. Also, consumers now conduct e-commerce increasingly more on mobile devices. Therefore, the rise of e-commerce as a driver for search is even further pronounced on mobile. And as for video, the video market reached 3 billion in 2016 and has become an important part of online display. And looking at its growth, almost 27 European markets grew double digits within 3 clusters. A growth leader cluster consists of mainly emerging markets, and most of the mature markets grew plus and minus 10% of the European average. And strong growth indicates that video continues to attract brand advertising budgets driven by 3 factors: Number one, the explosion of video content has unlocked a new supply of inventory. Number two, more premium video inventories become available as broadcasters start to embrace a total video approach. And finally, social platforms keep driving forward their video advertising efforts. Let's look at the market leaders in mobile display. Mobile display is highly concentrated and dominated by mature markets. However, we saw a rapid growth from CE markets, and 14 out of the 22 countries that reported mobile display in 2016 grew faster than the market leader, which was UK in this case. However, not all market leaders are created equal. We found that top 10 market leaders in total display may not be the case for mobile display and video. And finally, we just want to demonstrate the point that robust growth of online display in 2016 was driven by mobile. This is the overall growth for total display in 27 European countries in 2016. But if we exclude mobile, you can see that some countries will be in decline or with a slower growth. And if we exclude mobile and video, the situation is even worse. That's all from me. Daniel, could you wrap it up for us, please?
Thanks, Jessie. So to conclude, what are we going to see for 2017 based on the signals that we got from the IABs in this year's study? We've seen a similar growth rate, a slight slowdown, but still double-digit, of around 10% over 2016. We see a stronger acceleration of concentration of growth, so not everybody is benefiting from this growth. We see video becoming the permanent battleground for consumers, so the importance of video is going to grow. But within the video category, we see different innovations, in particular live video, sports, and in particular live video gaining ground with a focus on sports and UGC content. Esports, again, is going to be a big trend. Audio increasingly, due to often brand safe environments and good ad integration, we're seeing a new paradigm of AI first, so artificial intelligence, data, and predictive consumer behavior entering the market. And we can see a decisive year now for regulation, as we are in a make or break situation in Europe, whether this strong growth and the health of this ecosystem that we have here can be sustained in the future. And with that, I'm going to hand back to Alison. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Daniel and Jessie. That was a really illuminating snapshot of trends over, well, since the beginning of IAB Europe's ADEX benchmark. I think the figures really speak for themselves in terms of how impressive the growth has been and the different kind of evolutions that we've been through over those past 10 years. So we're going to move now to our panel discussion, and we're just bringing in Blake, Juliet, and Tim. Welcome, everybody, to this afternoon's panel discussion.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Hi, great. So we've got everybody there, which is super. And we're just going to kick off, first of all, with a question which perhaps Daniel and Tim would like to comment on, in terms of Daniel being our research partner and Tim as our chair of our IAB Europe Research Committee. If you wanted to just give us a comment on why the ADEX benchmark is so important to us as an industry and what in it enables us to do. Do you want to go first briefly, Daniel?
Sure. So there are a couple of things. First, the European markets are extremely fragmented, and there's a lack of a common standard. So common European numbers also establish a common European digital ad market. Secondly, the European ad markets are very different stages of development, and common European numbers allow individual markets and market participants to benchmark markets against each other. Who's the most mature, where could growth come from, and so forth. And thirdly, in the wake of a European digital single market, it's also important from a policy perspective to highlight and provide policy executives with European numbers to show the health and the growth of this industry.
Thanks, Daniel. Do you want to add to that, Tim?
Yes, I obviously agree with a lot of things that Daniel has said. And I would say, firstly, by the way that these figures, these expenditure figures have been captured and also compiled, I would say it's probably the most accurate reflection we have available on the size of the European advertising industry and showing the way it's grown since the study was conducted. So I think the figures are probably the most believable and accurate in the way they're done right across the industry. For the digital industry specifically, it also highlights the growth of the industry in direct comparison to other media, and in a sense validating that advertising budgets are following the audiences where they're going. And for us, for publishers, it's really highly valuable. It helps us understand areas of growth, it helps shape product development, it helps shape technology strategies, and as an example of that, whilst we can see the increasing pace in demand for mobile and video, in our own systems, the AdX benchmark sort of helps qualify and validate that across the industry as a whole. And finally, I would say another strength is to allow this direct comparison of results across the 27 markets, which is obviously difficult and challenging, and specifically how growth patterns are changing by these markets. And again, I think for anyone in the industry, that's incredibly valuable and to help develop product strategies, advertising strategies to capitalize on these different market growths.
Thanks, Tim. So on the subject of growth, I'd just like to move on to Blake to discuss online and TV. I think we saw early on in the presentation, we saw how online has constantly grown over the last 10 years. And indeed, when we looked at the bubble chart, I thought Daniel's comments were particularly interesting in terms of showing that growth curve is by no means decreasing. So I just wanted to come to Blake and ask you about the innovation and trends that you feel are driving this growth, Blake, from your perspective.
Sure, of course, and thank you for the intro. With regards to TV directly, I think as Daniel highlighted, the opportunity within digital is far broad and great with regards to being able to allow a brand to play a relevant role. When you look at it directly, we can see obviously that there has been video growth of 21% across Europe, and that again is naturally due to the growth of online video viewing. So looking at things from an AV planning point of view, I think is always important when comparing TV. We're looking at online video, we're looking at how we can make sure a brand is relevant in that space. In terms of general innovations, I think one of the biggest drivers is the fact that brands are beginning to organize their data more effectively. So what this is obviously allowing for is clearly more actionable insights and targeting against their audience, but also it's allowing them clearer and more consistent measurement as they're beginning to see the direct effects with more accuracy. And this therefore allows them to understand where ROI is and invest in those areas with more gumption. I think the linking off this, when you understand the audience and what that has meant to your brand, we're also moving more into the space of addressability and using addressable media. And that has linked to something else that came up in Daniel and Jesse's report with regards to creative and assets. I think we are beginning to see how they are being developed more effectively, using things like dynamic creative optimization that allows us to be truly dynamic based on the data that we're seeing. And the final point, I think, in terms of innovations that's driving this is e-commerce, as again was highlighted. And we've seen a huge growth of e-commerce, and hence why we need to ensure that we are managing the experience directly through to transaction. And I think that that moment of inspiration of a brand and that moment of transaction through online can now be implicitly interlinked. So that means that the growth of e-commerce and direct sales has again meant that we can produce the experiences directly through to sales.
Yeah, those are really interesting points, Blake. Thank you. Does anybody else want to jump in there with further comment on that? I'm going to be doing the questions then. Okay. So I just wanted to move to the smaller markets. And Daniel, you've spent a lot of time looking at the individual markets and talking to the national IABs there and other players in those markets. How do you think smaller markets are driving growth, and what opportunities are they particularly taking advantage of?
The smaller markets were kind of first hampered for a couple of years as digital, despite everything, despite personalization and so forth, predominantly remained a scale business. And those small markets by themselves couldn't scale up to the level of technical infrastructure, to the level of ad quality and so forth, but they needed partners. We see them now in a kind of second mover advantage position where, let's say, if you look at the ad tech value chain, for instance, or the growing pains have been resolved, issues have been ironed out. So it's easier now as a second mover to adopt standards and to actually see what works without having to go through a very costly trial and error process yourself. We're seeing also, of course, higher broadband penetration and mobile access in emerging economies or emerging markets in Europe are driving the growth. So again, lots of infrastructural and social and macro, socio-demographic and macroeconomic drivers that are behind things in the smaller markets. One last thing is we see, in particular with regards to the smaller markets, often a centralization of ad budgets. Ad budget, or it could be a CDE budget. So increasingly we see cross-border ad buying, and a common digital infrastructure here helps that and actually helps to aggregate these smaller markets into bigger commercial entities.
Yes, that's really critical, I think. And one of the things that both your comments and those of Blake have led me to think is that there's greater investment from a brand advertising perspective, and that might be being spread more effectively across these markets now, whereas previously I think it was more the more advanced markets where the brand advertising spend was leading. I wondered if you wanted to comment on that, Tim.
Sorry, Alison, I got a broken up line then.
You got it. Okay, fine. So it was really to get your comments on increasing brand advertising spend in digital and how you see that moving, whether you think it's increasing across the board, across Europe, and whether that increase is greater now than it has been in previous years.
Yes, okay, sure, Alison. So, I mean, the study does highlight display growing much faster than both classified and search, and this is just a trend that's been reported for a few years now. And if we look specifically at brand advertising, there's actually been an increase in brand advertising for many years now. And I think the primary drivers of this are both the changing consumer media habits, as more of the eyeballs go online, but also the great advantages we've seen in the creative formats, which are more complementary to brand advertising. If we go back many, many years, we had a banner, and then suddenly we managed to invent Flash, and things started clashing around, and now everything is really video. So the formats are very much more complementary to brand advertising, and they're more easy to migrate from other channels, specifically TV. And that's particularly true of this increase in video consumption and advertising. I think it's an area that's certainly going to continue growing, but I do think there's a number of challenges the industry has to work through. There's been a lot of issues in the last 12 months, specifically in the UK, on brand safety. There's challenges agreeing on standard measurements, and one of the things I think is that OTS is measured in so many different ways now. So I think ODS needs to take into account viewability measures, completion rates, whether the sound is on or off, whether the user is initiating or it's an auto-initiated ad. And I think that challenge in terms of looking at how it's going to grow in the future, I see little consensus on what is agreed in the standard in the industry as a delivered ODS. And I think if we are going to drive this brand advertising further, the industry really needs to get together a bit more and agree what measures constitute an ODS for brand advertisers, which will give them a greater confidence in increasing their investment. And I think I would also add, which is something that's come out of a number of other studies I've seen, that there's a great ask amongst brand advertisers for digital measurements to be more comparable with measures they're used to on TV. So I think if some of those things came along and the ODS was more defined and the metrics were more comparable with TV, then we will see a great increase in brand advertising. But there are a couple of these hurdles to come across before it really accelerates.
Thanks, Tim. Well, I think we have another person ideally positioned to talk about brand advertising spend and the evolution of cross-platform video execution in Juliet. So, Juliet, I wanted to ask you if you wanted to jump in and give us some comments on how you see video evolving in this space.
Sure. I mean, as more and more online video inventory becomes available, we are definitely expecting video advertising to keep driving a significant share of display growth. I think it's important at this point of the conversation to take a step back and look at the question of cross-platform video execution more from the perspective of the audience. I think especially in younger target groups. The way we're looking at in-stream online video advertising is kind of like a complex buildup of reach across multiple platforms and devices and formats, but that's not really the way audiences expect to consume content. I think if we look at what consumers are asking for, they just want great content as a consistent experience, from the big screen to the small screen, from the owned and operated platforms to social media. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying it's not critical for the video execution to be relevant to each specific context, but I think the consistency of the brand experience is as critical. Consistency allows advertisers to deliver a call to action while at the same time building brand equity over time. And that's why at RTL Group we've come up with this concept of total video, moving away from the traditional split between online video and TV and really just focusing on quality and consistency of the video content wherever that content might be distributed. So in a nutshell, I think that what we're looking forward in terms of the evolution of cross-platform video execution is really on this concept of consistency and how you're able to be relevant but also consistent across all the different channels and platforms that you have access to nowadays.
That's a really, I think, a critical point to remind us that we always need to go back to what are the user expectations and the fact that growth is going to come from increased usage and really good management of the assets and the inventory that we have available. I wonder if anybody else wants to jump in at that point further on video. Blake, would you like to?
Yeah, as I said in the previous one, in terms of the growth of online spend, I think that the whole kind of previous challenge that people had was with regards to assets and simply kind of running a 30-second TV ad in digital was obviously not going to fit the brand objective. We're able to use both technology and also ensuring that we're changing the briefing process so that we can understand exactly what sort of video asset needs to be produced right at the beginning against the behavior that we can see the consumer acting in, so that we can not only be relevant in that message, which allows for more effectiveness, but also to that point, making sure that we can be tell the story in these areas with more pertinence, rather than having to interrupt or more to the point, just annoy consumers by putting the wrong video in the wrong places.
Thanks. So I think that at this point we've probably got the opportunity for one further question, and it might be quite a good idea to have a look at Programmatic, which has been seen as one of the great levers to unlock growth over the past few years. What are people's views on how Programmatic is evolving? Do you think it's helping to unlock more brand spend in digital advertising? Juliet, I wonder if you'd like to comment on that in relation to your, your previous comments about brand and video.
Sure. Maybe let's start just because there are so many definitions of programmatic.
That's true.
Let's just maybe define it here for the next 5 minutes as, let's say, a complete or partial automation of the advertising, buying, and selling process. So let's take the pretty broad definition of programmatic, I would say. I mean, programmatic is definitely helping to unlock more brand spend in digital advertising. I think it's especially true now for video advertising. If you look at the increased use of private marketplaces, this is, to me, the clear sign of a transition that's happening now from traditional media execution into programmatic transactions. The next steps now from private marketplaces are what we call curated marketplaces, which group inventory from multiple publishers with filters on specific themes such as viewability or audience attributes. Here with curated marketplaces, we're getting closer to an open market, but still providing a lot of safeguards for advertisers. So I think that if we keep an eye on the growth of private and curated marketplaces, we get a clear view on how programmatic is driving exponential growth in digital advertising. Now, I'd like to come back to one of the points that was made early in the panel conversation, which is about data, because clearly programmatic is critical to fully unlock the potential of data. And we're only starting to scratch the surface on how more effective digital advertising can be with data. I think that with advancements in machine learning, that will allow platforms, advertisers, but also agencies to analyze the explosion of data. And we will probably see new forms of programmatic advertising emerging and further drive spend. Just to give an example of what I mean by that, I think deduplication of reach and frequency across platforms is one of the challenges that we're trying to solve with machine learning at the moment. And once we get there, I think we will see even more spend going through programmatic channels. Maybe just to close on and also to reinforce a point that's been made already, I think in addition to programmatic, what will really help move spend in digital advertising is to provide advertisers with more transparency on viewability and fraud. We're definitely committed at RTL Group to offer a 100% brand-safe environment with the highest viewability, and we're closely following any industry-wide efforts to help develop standards around viewability and brand safety for advertisers and brands.
Thanks, Juliet. Well, certainly, if people aren't aware of IAB Europe's viewability initiative in partnership with EACA and WFA, certainly do let us know about that. And the other point that I wanted to make here is that we actually have the third wave of our Attitudes to Programmatic survey in field at the moment. So if people haven't completed that survey yet, we'd be really grateful if you could spare 5 minutes of your time. You can find the details on our homepage, on the slider there, or in our Twitter feed. So we'd really encourage people to participate in that survey, and that's going to be the next piece of research that we released from IAB Europe on ad spend trends. That will be coming in September this year. Okay, so to finish off, we gave our panelists and presenters a quick piece of homework to do in asking them what 3 words they would choose to describe what they thought advertising would look like in 2 years' time. So this is reckoning time, guys, to see whether you thought about that piece of homework. So I wondered if, Daniel, would you like to kick off with your 3 words?
Sure. Thanks, Alison. It was difficult to pick a few words as there's so many trends, but I think it narrows down to many we've seen in the panel discussion, and to pick up on Juliette's last point, we're moving away, number one, from a mobile first to let's say an AI infrastructure to make everything smarter. It will become scalable. The second one is scalable personalization. And the third one for me is creative innovation, moving away from standard ad units to more immersive experience and non-interrupted advertising.
Okay, that's super. Thank you. I like those. That gives us plenty to think about. Blake, how about you?
Right, so I'm a big fan of alliteration, unfortunately. So I've gone for 3 I's. My first one is intuitive, because I think that as Juliette highlighted, machine learning is going to begin to rise, and therefore I think that we'll be able to be more dynamic, and the online marketplace will be more intuitive in the natural decisions it's making. Interconnected, because I think that we will begin to look more at the behaviors and ecosystems of campaigns, so that we can really understand where brands can be most relevant across the whole piece. And then the final one I've got here is integrated, because I think that digital is no longer being seen as a silo, and I want it to be completely integrated within everything that we do, so we are absolutely looking at the whole user profile and where a brand can be as most relevant as physically possible.
That's very interesting. That's 3 I's. We'll have to remember that. Tim, how about you?
Yes, well, I'm glad everyone's used more than 3 words, because I was finding that challenge. I think the first thing I say, and I hope, but I also believe this, because we're all working hard towards this, that the industry will be a lot more harmonised in agreeing what how they want to measure success and how they want to plan strategies online. So I think harmonisation is going to improve. Personally, I think there's going to be slower growth. I think this is going to be driven by a couple of factors. One of them is challenging times, or more challenging times, in the UK, and we've seen how dominant the UK is in the overall picture. And I think that's going to create challenges of increasing growth beyond what we've seen in the past. Also on that growth, I think, there's a great unknown, and it links with my next point in a second, but there's a great unknown with the general data protection regulation, and what that means for us all next year, and what impact that will have on the industry as a whole. And I think it's going to be even more automated and mobile dominant.
Thanks, Tim. And finishing off then with Juliette. Do you want to help us draw towards the close, Juliette?
Sure. I think some of it will be a bit of a summary of the previous panelists, but I think the first one to me is contextual, and that goes in line with what was just said about the big regulatory unknown that we live in, and how will we need to evolve if we can't do as much targeting on behavioral that we're doing at the moment. What does that mean for contextual advertising, and is this a new age of contextual coming up? I think the second word I would go for is native. We haven't talked at all, or not much, about native advertising, but we know how much demand there is at the moment, both from an advertiser standpoint, but also from a consumer standpoint, for more innovative and integrated forms of advertising. So I think native will probably play a big role. And the last point, I would come back to brand safety and viewability. And having done that exercise as an industry to offer a much more transparent and fraudless environment for advertisers to spend on.
Thanks, Juliette. So I'd like to close now by thanking our presenters and panelists from today. So we had Daniel Knapp and Jessie Chen from IHS Markit, and Juliette Van Ant from RTL Group, Blake Cuthbert from OMD, and Tim Jones from Oath. Thanks for helping to add some expansions and twists on the data and the interpretation there. That was really useful for us. In terms of your ability now to access the report, you'll be able to go, as I said earlier, to our Value of Advertising area and access the webinar recording and presentation. There's an area for feedback at the end of this survey. So any questions that we received from the audience that we weren't able to answer today, we'll try to get back to people individually on those. I'll just leave you with a slide with our contact details should you wish to get in contact with me, Marie-Claire from IAB Europe, or Daniel or Jessie from IHS. We're very happy to take further questions on this survey and evolve it in the future for the benefit of everybody in the market. Thanks very much. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Alison.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye. Thank you.